Okay, so I want to do something a little bit differently for this type of video because I want to talk about the stats for the offensive line because um, I find stuff like this very interesting, and I find it also kind of difficult to interpret in a lot of ways. And this is one of those videos that I really want it to be as collaborative as possible, rather than me just kind of sharing my direct personal opinion. Because when people talk about the Philadelphia Eagles, actually, they're really kind of the perfect example because they won the Super Bowl, and they won the Super Bowl especially in a way where everyone kept saying that O line was amazing, that D line was amazing, etc., etc. And it was obviously great, no disputing it. But everyone was saying, "Oh, that O line, that's why they're so good. If you give so and so this O line, they would be amazing." And now here we have ESPN's analytics for their pass block win rate and run block win rate, and you have the Eagles ranked sixth and ranked ninth. Okay, and they're saying like that's what it was all. It was all in the trenches. That's why they were able to win these games and etc. 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 And no doubt that's a major you know aspect of that. But I just would love to know how we reach these conclusions for where these rankings lie. Because before I even unpack this even more so, we have this again, 6 and 9, pass, rush, this column is pass, this column is rush. The right all the way over, and all to the left is more defensively. But I want to keep the defense to the side. Because then even if we now go to PFF, and we look at their kind of overall rankings. If we just look at like a pass block here, right, we'll see the Eagles at 6, and then we got their run block. They are at a 6. So even that now doesn't perfectly coincide. We could look at a team like the Atlanta Falcons. They were number one run block team, and yet if we look at them from an analytical standpoint, their run block, they were 20. So it's just how do we reconcile that? And people will say something like, "Oh, put Jaden Daniels behind the Philadelphia Eagles O line," and it's like, well, according to this, they had a better, um, you know, run block. They were able to technically, put their running backs in a better position to succeed. They're ranked second, and the Eagles ninth. So again, how do we reconcile that? And then even from passing 9 to 6, I mean, you're talking about 67% to 66%. That's that's margin. It's very tiny, very tiny. And everyone says, "Oh, it's all about the O line." The Eagles set up. The Eagles, they gave the blueprint for how to win. Okay, how to win Super Bowls, how to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, right? And again, they're ranked 6 and 9 for Let's just after without having to keep repeating myself in terms of pass block and run block and this and that. We're just gonna say pass and run, right? For passing and run. Just for the O line though. We're not talking about Jalen Hurts, any of this other type of stuff. But that's what everyone kind of kept saying. That was the conclusion. But again, let's look at the Denver Broncos. 1-1. Their O line was again analytically the best. The best. So why weren't they dominating teams? Why were they unable to bully the Buffalo Bills in the playoffs? And even their defense. And I know I'm not going to really tackle defense but then it was like, oh, the defense was able to get to Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. This is theoretically better defensive pass rush and pass rush. So how do we reconcile this? It's just pretty interesting to me. We can even look at a team like the Chicago Bears. Everyone kept saying Caleb Williams has this awful O line, which I believe they do. But then you say, well, hey, 15th in passing and 8th in rushing. That's not that bad. But then again, they couldn't run the ball. They struggled to run the ball. And you would say, oh, well, the O-line's getting eat up and this and that. There's no space, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, well, why and how then? And so that's what I find really interesting. Even a team like Denver Broncos, who we showed was 1-1. So this is kind of very simple. PFF then should, in theory, have them being ranked first. And I'm pretty sure they have them ranked high, but they should be ranked first. And we already see they're not. Their run block, PFF has them as 10th, and their pass block, that they have them as 1 for the pass block. Okay. But again, this is what I also love too now. Denver Broncos, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Green Bay Packers, Arizona Cardinals. Great pass block. All right. Where are all of their wins? Where were people praising how great this O-line is and why this? When people talked about how successful Jalen Hurts was, they kept mentioning the O-line, the O-line, the O-line. Why aren't anyone mentioning about the O-line for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? They got a great O-line for both passing and rushing. So I don't understand. So some of these analytics are definitely trickier, and I kind of said this in my previous video because I kind of came across this take. I developed this take as I was making like a Houston Texans clip, and again was just trying to reconcile all of this. And I do think data like this is so much more difficult to unpack when looking at other things. When you're looking at other things, as you guys know, especially when I do a lot of like quarterback, more advanced analytics, I look at things like, intended air yards per pass attempt, per completion, yards after catch per pass attempt, per completion. Like and like those things can make a lot more sense to me, and I think that those numbers can be a little bit more pure in terms of the influences that cause them. It's a lot easier for me in a lot of ways to be like, well, we can see where this is an issue in the player, an advantage of the coach, a disadvantage of the coach, whatever it may be. Like when I see not a lot of yak, when I see that you don't have a great team, but you're asking your quarterback to throw, deeper balls than a team that has a significantly better, roster. I'm just kind of like, well, that's coaching, or that's bad decision making and bad, reads by the quarterback. Like you can kind of make sense of it more, and you can highlight, oh, look at this. The Kansas City Chiefs, they're dealing with a bunch of injuries. You can see that they're leading the NFL in yards after catch, but then they're also throwing the shortest passes. To me, that directly signals that's some coaching. And that's Patrick Mahomes buying into, what Andy Reid is asking him to do and not trying to do too much, which again, credit to both of them for that matter. And you can see with an Anthony Richardson, you can see AR throwing like just the deepest passes nonstop, and you can see he like leads the NFL in intended air yards, and you're like, that's and has a terrible completion percentage, and you're just like, well, that's just a guy that's just airing it out. Like that's a guy that's like not actually making, accurate throws, and like it just becomes more clear. I think this type of data, it just gets more muddled, but I do again find it fascinating that we heard the secret sauce of this team is the O-line for the Philadelphia Eagles. And yet when you have other teams that have potentially better O-lines, like the Baltimore Ravens, everybody talked about Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry way more than that O-line. Way more. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people talked about Saquon Barkley and even Jalen Hurts to a degree, although less than Lamar Jackson, since Lamar Jackson was in the MVP conversation. But nobody was necessarily just kept saying the O-line, the O-line, the O-line. They just weren't. Not at the same level of the Philadelphia Eagles. They really weren't. And so I don't know. I'm curious what your guys' thoughts, because again, we can look at a team and everyone's like, oh, this O-line was trash for Patrick Mahomes. Trash. That's why they lost. It was technically top 10 in both categories. So, what are you saying? You're saying that Patrick Mahomes can only win, and this is not a knock at Patrick Mahomes, so don't take it that way. But it's just like, are you saying that he needs to have top 5 O-line then? Top 4? Does he need to have a better O-line than Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles, because they technically were better in run blocking? and yet the Eagles had a better run game. So why is that? Is it just because of Saquon Barkley? What about then Jalen Hurts running the ball? I thought Patrick Mahomes is a mobile quarterback. So it just, I'm always so fascinated in how we can get to the truth and how we can use stats and data to kind of get to the truth, but also recognize that it's not all or nothing, and that a lot of times things can be genuinely misleading. It is genuinely misleading. Like if we look at it, even PFF, that's why context matters. Overall rating, the Atlanta Falcons were technically the fourth best team according to PFF. Now, what that could mean is that the Atlanta Falcons are technically an awesome team, but their quarterback position was just a disaster, or the coaching decisions caused them to have a significantly worse record than what their team could actually achieve. Like, that's where, man, one day we will have higher quality AI, and we'll be able to play the game through like these like prediction models, whatever, and we can take out a Kirk Cousins and put in, a Baker Mayfield, for instance, or a Patrick Mahomes, any of these quarterbacks, and be like, okay, what would the record have been? Or if we change this coach out and put Andy Reid in, then that would actually be pretty fascinating. But it could also just be a flaw in how this data is connected. Because again, the 49ers, they were technically the 10th best team. Detroit Lions number 1. It's just kind of interesting. The Commanders who went to the NFC Championship game, 20th. The Bills, 19th. Just I don't know. It's an imperfect science, quite frankly. That's why you always got to be careful with stats. And I really love what Greg Cosell said, and I think it makes a lot of sense, is that you first try to figure out what you see with your eyes, and then you look to see if the data supports what you're seeing. But you always go with what you're seeing more so than what the data is. Because, again, we know how misleading stats and data can be. It doesn't mean that you just throw it out. It's always nuanced. Sometimes it matters more, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the data shows you things that your eyes don't necessarily see. And it's imperfect. And that's why I'm still always trying to figure out the best way. I still wish that I could just figure out a good formula for my own conclusions to draw with all of this, and I'm yet to do it. And again, if I was able to reach a great formula and a great kind of outline of how to do it, I mean, I'd be a super genius, and I would be able to make millions of dollars working for some advanced analytics company, or even a team for that matter, because it's not easy to make sense of. It's why they got people with like PhDs and this and that to try to figure it out. And it's both an art and a science. But I really found these rankings for the O-line so fascinating. And I think, again, using the Eagles as this jumping off point, the Eagles and the Chiefs for that matter, both teams that were in the Super Bowl, both teams that technically have great, offensive lines. But, one, it's greatly emphasized for the reason of their success, and the other one, it's emphasized for why they weren't successful. So, I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there for you guys to, curious what your thoughts are. What do these numbers even mean to you? Are you the type of person that kind of, cares about these stats? You find it kind of interesting, thought-provoking, but, kind of skip over it? Or do you think no, this data is more closer to the truth than anything else? Would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment. So whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions, let's get in some fights, but ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We are building an amazing community here, and I absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to, something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're well on our way to doing it. And please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much. See you next time.